Hello, my name is Stephanie Kreskoff. I'm a social work and psychology double major at UMBC. I've been a writing fellow for about 3 semesters. I'm here to talk about how an understanding of social work theory and concepts could positively impact the practice of online writing tutoring. I'll end the presentation by sharing ideas for how to include some of these concepts into trainings of new writing tutors. So before we get into some of my main ideas, it's important to understand the setting in which my perspective was born. Our Writing Fellows program is part of the writing support services offered by the Macklin Center for Academic Success at Universities at Shady Grove, or USG. USG is a campus in Montgomery County, Maryland that offers select degree programs for 9 Maryland universities. All classes offered at USG are at the junior and senior level. Students transfer from community colleges or other institutions in their junior year to finish their 4-year degrees. So, both Writing Fellows and the students they meet are all upperclassmen. By the time students get to USG, they've already completed their Gen Ed requirements and are focused on obtaining credits towards their major. Another special feature of our Writing Fellows program is that it's only offered in a few courses, all of which include pretty major writing assignments. Peer Writing Fellows at USG are in a unique position as they work with students within their major who are taking classes they themselves have already completed. So I want to take a look at the bigger context at play. When the pandemic hit, everything changed. In addition to school, work, and personal life stress, students across the country were feeling the impact of this health crisis. The pandemic kept us inside, and it kept us stressed. Many students experienced mental health-related issues as a result. During this time, Writing Fellows had the chance to meet with students while in their respective environments. Students were tired, stressed, and overwhelmed. Speaking for myself, words like the ones in this image shown were on my mind all the time. How could our fears and anxieties about this deadly virus not impact delivery and outcomes of the Writing Fellows program services? Like other programs at USG, and I'm sure all of the other writing centers and colleges across the country, our Writing Fellows program went virtual that semester. This offered writing tutors a window into student lives like never before. As a social work major, I started to think about how so many of the social work concepts I've been studying in my classes intertwined with the Writing Fellow tenets and practices. But first, I want to spend some time on some key social work terms that we'll need to understand the presentation going forward. Social work as a field maintains a holistic perspective. Social workers consider an individual within the context of their own environment. The person and environment theory describes just that. This approach helps social workers understand the various environments that a person experiences and how they might impact the client as an individual. This approach asks that individuals are seen beyond what meets the eye. Writing Fellows receive student papers and provide feedback without ever having met the student. It can be challenging for a Writing Fellow to review a student's work without knowing the student as a person and what their life is like outside of what is represented on the Word document they see before them. When Writing Fellows receive student papers, they're receiving a product that represents more than just the student's ability or potential as a writer. Students, especially at universities at Shady Grove, are not just students. Students also might be parents or caretakers, have duties outside of schoolwork. They might be facing difficulties and barriers a Writing Fellow cannot see just by looking at their assignment. On top of all that, over the last few semesters, student papers also reflected the stress felt during the global pandemic. So let's talk some about the strengths-based approach. Social workers must identify what their clients are capable of or good at. Social workers practicing with this approach see that everybody has strengths and that building on these strengths can help people in many areas of life. Respecting the dignity and worth of a person means respecting what makes them unique, acknowledging their right to make their own decisions, and generally seeing the person as worthy and valuable no matter what. Essentially, this strengths-based approach focuses on what individuals bring to the table and what they can do. The dignity and worth piece refers to respecting that individuality. So, empathy in the social work context means seeing outside one's own perspective and being able to see someone else's point of view. Advocacy in the social work context refers to supporting individuals in getting their needs met. And self-determination is the idea that every individual is the expert on their own life. They have the right to their own beliefs and course of action. I was learning about these concepts in my social work classes around the same time I was working with students as a Writing Fellow. I saw them within the context of their environments, and I could see the spaces in which they'd written these papers I was quick to judge. From these experiences during the pandemic, I realized that an understanding of social work concepts could be easily applied into Writing Fellows tutoring practice. The Writing Fellows tenets and social work values are too alike and too complementary not to join forces. I remember learning about how the student's paper is their own, and that we're meant to support them in their strengths. We're not meant to critique or edit, but to initiate a conversation. The kind of conversation that helps the student develop their point of view, helps them to think critically about the ideas they have put on paper. These conversations help students appreciate and more fully understand their unique point of view. Applying social work frameworks and techniques to the already existing ones can only enhance the program and create better student outcomes. Now that I've talked a lot about concepts and ideas, it's time to think about how these recommendations can be put into practice. So what can be done in Writing Fellows trainings that can inform students about the social work frameworks and how to use them? Ask tutors to see the bigger picture. You can ask them to zoom out and see how their environment and contexts that they interact with could impact them in their productivity. The diagram on this slide illustrates the person in environment theory. So you have the individual at the center, surrounded by their social roles and probably their expectations. Then there are systems like school and some others that this individual is involved with. Beyond that, you consider more abstract entities that can have a concrete impact on the individual. Coupling this activity with an explanation of the person in environment theory teaches students that their work is not a reflection of their standalone ability to complete the assignment. Most students live really full lives, and it's important to have some compassion. When you respect someone's dignity and work, you're accepting them for who they are and how they're different. To do this, Writing Fellows can show empathy. Writing Fellows are meant to put their judgments aside when working with students. If they can do that, they leave room for empathy. It might be helpful if students came from a place of curiosity rather than judgment. To practice, Writing Fellows in training can develop their question-asking abilities. When you can only speak in questions, you have to really listen to understand. It would also force students to come up with clarifying questions, which are helpful for any Writing Fellows who know how to do. Demonstrating empathy is important because it shows students that they can trust their ideas and recognize the value of their unique point of view. In a session, empathy might help when students are struggling to find their voice or figuring out how to express their ideas. Sometimes students come to Writing Fellows meetings not knowing what their argument is going to be in their paper. They need help talking through it, but they're afraid to speak the ideas aloud because they don't want to be wrong. If students feel like tutors want to know where they're coming from, they might have an easier time navigating their thought processes and then can gain confidence doing it. Without empathy, the peer collaboration piece gets lost. It can be easy for tutors to forget what it was like when they first took that class. Writing Fellows might think that they're being empathetic or reassuring when they say, "Oh, all you have to do is," or "Oh, you'll be fine." Students in their role plays should be encouraged to think about these subtle statements and how, while they sound innocuous, can be actually really damaging. To put empathy into practice, one suggestion I have is to ask students to do role play doing a bad job of showing empathy, and discuss what could have been done differently. For example, students could discuss a scenario in which the tutor tells a concerned student not to worry so much. Students might then talk about how dismissive that would be, how it might prevent the student from engaging in the future. They could talk about more fitting responses for similar situations. Trainers could also facilitate a discussion about what a student receiving help might be feeling or thinking during the session. Writing Fellows might imagine the students feeling vulnerable, thinking that they're about to get critiqued or feel insecure about the work they've put forward. If the Writing Fellows can see from the student point of view, they can empathize with their position and therefore do a better job supporting them. In general, a lot of the skills I talk about today can be taught via scaffolding. Training can be a great place for students to observe a behavior, talk about it, and then practice it in a supportive environment. This can prepare students so that they're more easily able to implement these skills when meeting with their peers. So now let's talk about advocacy. To advocate for a client in social work is to help them try and get their needs met. In the Writing Fellows context, the peer tutor can support the student in learning to advocate for themselves. Students can help their peers develop their point of view, take control over their thinking and writing processes, and learn to trust their voice. Students can learn that they can meet their own needs using their own skills and may have answers to their own questions. They can learn that they are more capable than maybe they realize. Advocacy may teach a student, by example, how to critique their own work. A Writing Fellow can learn to ask questions that help students see where they can make their own improvements all on their own. Advocacy can help a student become their own resource. Advocacy in this sense is about helping students to help themselves. It's important that all students know where their resources are. In trainings, Writing Fellows could create a resource guide. They can think about where they themselves have sought help, whether that's through campus resources or resources online. When meeting with students, tutors can pose the same question. Where in the past have they found useful resources? This conversation can help students realize that they know more about how to help themselves than they realize. Writing Fellows can distribute the resource guide they have made in the training to the students they work with. Possible resources could include Purdue ELF for citation help, or names of library personnel that can help with research. Everybody has strengths. However, when peer tutors review papers, it might be more obvious where students can make improvements. One suggestion I might have is that writing fellows spend time in the trainings practicing seeing students' strengths and helping students apply those same skills to other parts of their paper. Another recommendation I have is that students look at drafts where there's a lot going on and find a section that shows strengths. Then they could role-play amongst themselves to identify what went well and discuss how certain vocabulary used might make a student feel. Tutors can role-play how they would work with the student and play to their strengths. It might be helpful for writing fellows in training to come up with some strengths-based vocabulary. This could be questions, comments, or affirming but not overly optimistic compliments. It's important that tutors are careful and kind speakers, and it might help if they had some strength-based vocabulary in their back pocket. Strengths-based vocabulary might include statements like, in the context of a writing fellows meeting, self-determination can look like letting the student sit in the driver's seat. Maybe the student already knows what they want help with, or what they don't want help with. A student and I might have different ideas about how we should spend our meeting time. It can be hard to keep this person-centered approach in mind when you are in the position of trying to help someone, especially when you see that they need help. In trainings, we can talk to students about how they can promote self-determination. In trainings, writing fellows can talk about how they can work to remain open to new perspectives, even when they disagree with them. Training materials might include an agenda that tutors can use to guide their meetings and do so with self-determination in mind. Training time could also be used to discuss how to practice self-determination throughout the session. To make sure I keep student determination front and center, I created an agenda that I use as a template for each student meeting. This sort of template could be distributed and discussed in trainings. Tutors can even create their own if they have different ideas or methods that could work for them. So here's how I conduct student meetings. First, I build rapport. I ask students about their semester so far and how their class is going. I ask them how they feel about this assignment. The conversation is focused on them. I let them know that this is their time and I want them to use it however benefits them best. Then I address general strengths. I might say, so, I enjoyed reading your paper, or I noticed you did a good job of. I point out what the student did well. I validate them and let them know that I appreciate the choices they've made so far as they worked on their paper. Next, I'll ask some preliminary questions. I'll say, how do you feel about your paper so far? Is there anything you want to look at specifically today? I ask them if they have any comments or questions before we go on to my notes. I do this because I want them to know that their needs and concerns come before mine, and I'll do whatever I can to support them. Every student gets a copy of my notes for them before the meeting. When we meet, I tell them how I like to structure the meetings. I ask them if my plan sounds okay and let them know they can interrupt the process at any time. I share the plan because I want their input. I want them to feel like they have a say in how the meeting is conducted. Next, I'll prioritize and conclude the session. When I prioritize, I address each numbered comment. I discuss the planned points, but I check in constantly. Students can always redirect the session or disagree with my point of view. At the end of the session, I review with the student what we've talked about. I ask them if they have any final concerns, and ask them how do they feel going forward. Do they have any ideas of their next steps? I remind them to use the Campus Writing Center as a resource. I let them know I'll be sending them a follow-up email with a meeting summary and APA resources. Finally, I will send them a follow-up email right after the meeting. With this tool, tutors can be more present with students because they're not as concerned about thinking about their next steps or what they're going to say next. Instead, they can pay more attention to body language and be more careful with word choice and types of questions. So some takeaways from this presentation would be social work frameworks are already embedded into the Writing Fellow tenets. Trainings can be easily adjusted to include information about social work values, and adjusting the existing training content could promote better program outcomes. Again, my name is Stephanie Kresloff. I'm from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Thanks for listening.